turbulent times.
Okay. Well, one of the first things, though, Greg Stubbe, Congressman from Florida, you've made such an impression, and you've been on the podcast before. But I have to say, we got to start off on a fun note here. It has been a big topic of conversation since, and we'll get into the unfortunate accident here earlier. But it has changed your looks. What's the feedback on the beard Stubbe and the no beard Stubbe?
So the Twitterverse, 68% actually, more than 2/3. The Twitterverse says I need to bring back the beard. So when I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, I had one of those C-collars on, and it was just rubbing my beard, and it was just driving me absolutely nuts. I mean, when I finally was with it enough, I told my dad, you need to go down to the emergency room and grab one of those pairs of clippers and just shave me down. And so for the time I had the C-collar on, because of the rubbing, I couldn't do it. And then ever since then, as I've started to grow it out, it's like it gets itchy and everything else, and we're getting into summertime in Florida. So I don't know. It's kind of like a new chapter, but we did put it out there, and the Twitterverse is like 68% to bring the beard back, but I look like 15 years older with the beard. So I don't know. I'm still playing with it.
Well, at the end of the day, though, it's what does the bride think and what the folks say. I think that depends a lot. But I know you mentioned itching. I've let mine grow out just a little bit. I've been traveling a little bit, let it grow out. But about another 3 or 4 days, that itching gets to me, and it's gone. I mean, I can't get past that. And of course, also having to go to drill still. I'm not applied for my beard waiver yet. Let's put it that way.
Oh, there you go. Well, what's funny is my son, who's 12, is adamant that I should bring the beard back. My wife prefers the beard, but she doesn't really care either way. But my son is like adamant, which is interesting because it does. I mean, I look easily 15 years older because my beard's all gray. So I don't know. We'll see. I don't have to be back at it for the next couple of weeks, but we'll see.
I can see that. Well, let's bring this up because, I mean, one of the things, a lot of folks, and I've got, calls when it first happened, your accident and everything. I saw some great stuff here online recently about the gentleman who stopped and helped you. As much as you want to, I mean, share a little bit with the podcast listeners who may have heard about it, but they're still, hadn't heard a whole lot completed. What was actually happening? How did this guy, and especially this tale of people helping people? I think, look, we all have actions. We all fall. We do but that idea that somebody would come along and help is just pretty amazing.
Yeah, and you really have to back up. I mean, if you're not a believer in God, you will be after hearing the story. And if you are a person of faith, it'll completely renew your faith. So the gentleman's name is Woody. It's Daryl Woody. I just call him Woody. His friends call him Woody. Who was the Amazon driver. But a week before this occurred, the Holy Spirit woke him up in the middle of the night, like 2:30 in the morning, and told him to fast. So fast forward a week, he's standing in front of my gate. He hadn't eaten in 8 days and had only had water. And that's why I think he could spiritually assess and deal with all the things that he dealt with in a very quick manner. He was at the exact moment in time that the Lord put him. If he would have been 5 seconds earlier, I'd have seen him, I'd have waved, he'd have gone about his day. If he'd have been 5 seconds later, I'd have been on the ground, and we have 5 acres, from where the gate is to where I was, he wouldn't have seen me because there's a berm in the way, and I'd have been laying on the ground. So if he wasn't there at that exact moment, we're still dealing with the aftermath of Ian down here in Southwest Florida. We were going to have a church gathering at our house on that Saturday, and so I was up trimming trees. And I was on an extension ladder, easily 25 feet up, because there were 20-foot 6x6s right next to it, and I was well above that. And Woody, I'm trimming trees with a large chainsaw. Woody pulls up. He is there at the exact moment, sees someone trimming with a chainsaw, didn't know it was me at the time. And then as he's walking back to the truck, hears the branch snap, turns around, and at that moment, he sees the limb come down, hit the extension ladder, ejects me up. So I didn't just get knocked down. I went up into the air.
Oh, wow.
And he said at that moment, I looked at him while I was midair, and we locked eyes from the gate to where I was falling, and fell 25 to 30 feet down, straight down to the ground. And the gate was shut. So at this moment, he's now going into, okay, Greg needs help. But Amazon's policies are they can't just hop somebody's gate and go onto their property. So He needed some type of person to witness him going on. And just as the Lord would have it, he looks to his left. There's a car coming up the road. He waves that guy down. He hops over the fence. They come to me. And this entire time, the chainsaw's running. They didn't hear the chainsaw go off until like midway down the driveway. And come to me, I'm laying face down, and I was unresponsive. And then he puts his hand on me, and I kind of came to, and he's like, Stubby, are you okay? And I said, yeah, I'm fine. But he knew I wasn't fine because I couldn't move.
Right.
So he calls 911 on his work phone. My wife was actually home, but we've built I'm actually talking to you from a studio in our house, and it's pretty soundproof in here. So this was all going on, and she had a work meeting in here, a work Zoom, and she had no idea what was happening. So Woody calls 911, deals with the ambulance, get me in the ambulance. I'm on my way to the hospital in the ER. And he also worked part-time for Congressman Vern Buchanan. And so he called his district director, who then called his chief of staff, who called my chief of staff. And that's actually how my wife found out, was my chief of staff called her and was like, hey, we're getting all these reports that Greg's like, he fell off a roof. And she was extremely dismissive. She's like, Greg's not on the roof. He's out there trimming trees. So she goes outside, and thankfully Woody waited around, and he flagged her down and explained to her what happened. Woody didn't even know what hospital I was transporting to. So thankfully the EMS guys had my cell phone. So when she called my cell phone, she at least could find out which hospital I was being transported to. But all of the, I was being transported. She had no idea. I was at the hospital, and nobody knew, like, did I just have a broken arm? Because I couldn't respond to anything. So nobody in my family even knew what was going on, and it was already being publicized on major news networks.
Oh, wow.
Because they were also monitoring, because Woody knew who I was when he did the 911 call. It was, hey, it's Congressman Stubby that fell.
Yeah.
So immediately all the local news stations and everybody else, it was all over the news. And my wife didn't know what had happened and what circumstance I was in. My family didn't. So a couple days later, and I was still in the ICU, but I had a concussion, tore the ligaments in my neck. I had a really bad contusion in my lungs, which is why I haven't been able to fly. And then I broke and cracked my pelvis. So tomorrow is a big day. So I'd ask for prayers. I get an x-ray tomorrow. And if that pelvis is healed, I can start putting weight on. So for 6 weeks, I've been either on crutches or a wheelchair, not able to move much. And now I'm feeling better. I feel good physically, but I can't put weight on my legs. So now it's just frustrating to not be able to start that process of getting back to walking and doing the things that we normally do.
Greg, an amazing story. And one, I mean, definitely, and I want to hit on several aspects of this. You made mention if you didn't have faith, I mean, this is something that could put that there, because look, folks, God does intervene in our life. God is a really real and present force in our life. And because he always told us he would be, and him being there through the fasting, I mean, there's just sensitivity to that. I have just a couple of questions that, again, I think emphasizes even more so. You've got a chainsaw up 20 something feet above air. How did you avoid, because I've done this before too, and when I hear this story, I can see myself. I've been up on ladders with chainsaws, and people say, why you do it? My tendency, especially if I ever would be to almost hold on to the chainsaw. What happened, especially with a running chainsaw? How did that? What happened with the chainsaw, or do you know?
I don't remember, but Woody saw the whole thing, and he said I was still holding on to it. So and I'm literally cutting. So my hand's on the trigger, you're cutting, and I wasn't using a limb cutting chainsaw. This is a 20-inch bar steel chainsaw that I was using. And so when the limb broke free, I still had it. I don't know. I haven't asked him if it was like on the ground next to me. I know it was on the ground next to me, but I don't know if I like threw it on the way down. I don't and this is crazy. And this is another blessing from God that I don't remember anything. And thank the Lord I don't, because I don't want to relive that traumatic experience. So from about an hour before to about the next day in the ICU, I don't remember any of that, which I think is a blessing, because I was in a lot of pain. I had a lot of things going on physically, and to have that feeling of falling from that height and getting knocked down and all of that, thankfully I don't have to deal with that. But the entire time the chainsaw was running. So again, another miracle that the chainsaw didn't kick back and take a leg off or take my arm off or hit me in the chest or whatever, especially from that height.
Yeah, from gashing like that. I mean, that is one thing. As you look at it, Greg, and we all go through, most of us have had, at least moments, not maybe as dramatic as this one. as you look back on it, and we'll just sort of wrap this side up, number one, having somebody there sensitive enough to actually take a chance. I mean, to somebody to go over and actually help. And you mentioned the fact that he knew you because he worked in Vern Buchanan's office. I mean, Greg, does it still give you sort of chills to think how good God is?
Yeah, I mean, Satan tried to take me out that day, and the Lord, but for the Lord, I'm here. And not only here, but statistically, if you take a fall off a ladder or from over 11 feet, statistically, you're either going to die or you're going to have paralysis. And I'm sitting here, other than dealing with a cracked pelvis, from falling almost over 25 feet. So it's a complete blessing. It was miracle after miracle after miracle. It certainly makes you refocus your life to what God wants you to do and be focused on that. I know I'm in Congress because that's where he wants me to be, but having that focus back on why I'm here and what I'm doing, I think is very, very important. But not just me, but my family, my son. It could have been very different that day.
It is. And I want to emphasize that as well, because and I'm glad you brought up Owen. It was going to be my next question. I'm glad you already led into it. Just in these few, and everything is still relatively fresh. We're only about a month and a half into this. Did that help? And because we all go through those moments in which we get into ruts, we do the things, and you've been in Congress now for a little bit, that you and I have talked about family before, and do we go to ball games, not go to ball, that perspective. Has this been one of those times that allowed you, while you were laying there either in the hospital or since you've been home, to say, okay, I know I'm where I'm supposed to be now. God, is there anything else I'm supposed to be doing?
Yeah, I felt led. I'm gonna be writing a book. I feel like that's what the Lord's put on my heart to do. It definitely makes you think about the time you have with family. When you're with your family, when you're with your son, and having those opportunities to spend quality time together, and not focused on things that ultimately don't matter, little things that are trivial in nature, and focusing on the things that are important in life. It certainly makes you refocus things when something like this happens to you.
Yeah, I remember distinctly, Greg, a talk that you and I had at Washington National Airport about 2.5 years ago, I guess it was. And it was one of those times when we were talking about family, and you made a comment. You said, I need to do that, to go here or fly home early, but I don't know if I should. And you said, well, my son's got a ball game, and I'll never forget. You said, I need to be at a ball game. And I looked at it, I said, yes, you need to be at that ball game. And that's what it took a while for me at times. My kids were a little bit older, but those are the things that God gives us that matter most. Those are the ones at the end of the day that matter. And this just emphasizes the fact that He is there, He is present, and that there are really priorities in our life that we need to take seriously.
Yep. Amen. Absolutely 100% correct.
Get that all together. Now, let's move off this, because, again, it is amazing, what has happened. And Woody, I'm so glad he was there for this. But now it's set, up. We've got a lot of things going on in Congress, and I know you've been working on, still working as you've gotten better. Tonight, in this week, is one of the first hearings on the China task force, if you would. And I think that's a big deal for a lot of folks, that we've been dealing with here in the States, and others, and especially with the balloon and everything else. What's the feeling? Because there seems to be a bipartisan nature to this. What are you feeling before you got injured? Now, as you're seeing it, in your conversation, how is that playing out? Do we think we're going to actually have a real conversation about China in this?
Well, what's interesting is now that the Republicans have the majority, there is some bipartisanship to this. Prior to us taking the majority and the Democrats running, it was like anything about China was bad because they didn't want to look bad on Hunter Biden and the president and all of their dealings. But now suddenly that we have control of the chamber, when we do bills to go against China, and the Chinese Communist Party is the number one national security threat to the United States, suddenly there's some bipartisanship to it. Even with the whole surveillance balloon issue, you even saw Schumer and another Democratic senator kind of going after Biden because they realize this is an American issue. And if they don't turn around on this, they're going to have some real problems at the ballot box, because at the end of the day, Americans want to protect American sovereignty. They want national security. And if you're going to say, oh, no, we're not going to talk about China because there's some compromise activity of the Biden family, that's not good for the American people. So suddenly you're seeing bipartisanship, but you're seeing that because the Republicans now have the majority in the House. You didn't see anything like this in the last 4 years that Speaker Pelosi was Speaker of the House. But I'm glad we have a task force that's going to be addressing this. We're going to be specifically addressing this. There's one bill that's already passed generally, but I think there's going to be a lot more specific things to go after the Chinese Communist Party that'll come out of this committee that I do believe you will see some pretty significant bipartisan support for.
And I agree with you completely on that. It is interesting. I was fortunate to get to know you as you first came in, but you unfortunately came in a minority and not a majority. I will say some of this reminisces to me what we saw in 17, 18, 16, when there was some bipartisanship in bills and criminal justice and everything else, and we just don't see that anymore. I got into it wasn't an argument. I got into an interview the other night, Greg. We've all done these interviews with the journalists who have an agenda. Okay. And I was did this interview, and they got into the weaponization committee, which you're a part of. And they were going off in this saying, basically, this weaponization committee, isn't this committee being weaponized against the federal government? I said, you're missing the point of this committee. And I said, maybe they could have named it differently or whatever, but there is real issues that never have been solved at the FBI, that have never been solved in intelligence, that have never been solved in several of the agencies that tend to focus on what they're doing independently from the legislative oversight side. So from your perspective, with what Jim is leading, and I know you're a part of, give your side of what this committee's goals are.
Well, and let's just take a step back. The Democrats use the DOJ and the FBI to weaponize the intelligence and security apparatus against a campaign of a president. And then for years, the mainstream media perpetrated a fraud against the American people, which was the Russia collusion fraud, which used the FISA process, the DOJ, the FBI, to surveil on American citizens who happened to work for Trump's campaign under the guise that there was some cooperation with Russia, which we now know factually did not exist. And so why were the intelligence apparatus of our government weaponized for political purposes? And that's what the gist of this committee is to go after that. Look, the DOJ, the FBI should be focused on enforcing the law and going after perpetrators of violating the law in our country, not political opportunity to be able to go after the opposing party. And that's exactly what they've been doing for years. And you saw it with going after parents at school board meetings. You've seen it with the Trump campaign and Russia collusion. You've seen it time and time again. And because Biden is there, this type of activity is still going on. I mean, I asked A.G. Garland when he was before the Judiciary Committee, man, it's been almost 2 years ago now. Are you going to prosecute the people that invaded the Department of Interior the same way you're going after the January 6th people? And he refused to answer the question. He didn't even know that it had happened. So you have a weaponized, politicized DOJ and FBI. I actually talked to an FBI agent who recently retired, and she retired. She now lives in my district. She retired because they wanted, and this is her words, not mine, they wanted to go after 80-year-old grandmas for walking into the Capitol and not go after real crime that is being perpetrated against Americans in our country.
Yeah, and I think, Greg, one of the things here is that we also, and I made this as a part of my conversation, it was sort of back and forth. And again, you're not going to win with somebody who already has their mind made up, but you can at least make points. And one of the things I said is, 97% of the FBI agents out there are just wanting to do their job. I remember when I was ranking member of Judiciary, we would get conversations with people all the time saying, hey, thanks for bringing this up. We're not the same as those who are in Washington, D.C. We're out here trying to do our job, and we're getting this kind of, crap rolled downhill, if you would, from, the Comeys and the Strucks and the Bakers and McCabe's and the rest. So I think it's very important to make that distinction. Because we've gotten into this determination, and it's sort of scary on both sides, that oversight is a bad thing, and that whoever's in the White House, the party in the Congress to match that, should go along with it. And the actual reality is the founders didn't see it that way. They saw it as a like-mindedness, but not that Congress would give up its oversight role.
Well, and I think that even Democratic members of Congress need to look at this from a congressional perspective of checks and balances. We are not just a blank check. We are not just a check for the White House, regardless of party affiliation. Right. Over the years, Congress has ceded so much authority to the White House on simple things. I mean, now we have a White House that's forgiving student loans, private loans that are made in a contract that's made between somebody that wants to go to college. I mean, the overstep that we've seen in the executive, Republicans and Democrats should look at that as Congress has a role that the founders put in place to be a check in our three-tiered system of government. And we have to be able to exercise that oversight authority over the White House and stop ceding authority and power to the White House, because that power should be in the Congress, not in the White House.
Greg, I've made this statement before, and I've gotten some rolled eyes looks, looks from Democrats who, just don't want to admit it. I've gotten some interesting looks from Republicans who don't want to admit it as well. I believe what you just laid out, I've said before, that if Congress continues passing legislation, it has sort of what I call the back end of it says, to be determined by X agency, to be determined, instead of actually writing bills that say, okay, here's our intent, here's how we expect to carry it out. But carrying more in not having oversight, not having true checks and balances, that we're actually perverting the system our founders gave us. And in reality, if we don't stop this 10 to 15 years down the line, and I believe we've actually almost got there now a little bit, we become more of a parliamentarian system in which we have a prime minister kind of aspect, or we have an executive mindset, and the legislative is simply there to either work around or sort of be the loyal opposition to whoever's in the White House. And that's not the way our Constitution set us up.
No, the power's in the people. The power's in the people and our representatives, and that's in the House. Every 2 years we get voted in by the people, and the power's in the people, not in the White House. And the more Congress cedes that authority to the executive branch, the more we're not allowed to be able to exercise that authority. I mean, you're seeing it with war right now, too, with what's going on in Ukraine and all of these different things. Traditionally, you'd have to come to the Congress and say, hey, if we're going to be engaged in military hostilities in a foreign land, you need to get a declaration of war to do that. But Republican and Democratic presidents have ceded so much of that authority that Congress has just basically become the purse strings. And it's time that we take a lot of that authority back. And it starts with every single one of those agencies to be able to rein some of that power back.
I agree. And you've opened up a door here that I want to walk through for just a minute. And that is, the sort of the foreign policy, the Ukraine issue and others. I'm just going to bring it from a different perspective. And it's one that I think that Congress is really struggling with right now. In Vladimir Putin's desire to reinstate the old Soviet Union, he's made that clear, in speeches before, and now he's going through it with Ukraine. Ukrainians stood up. And the desire for most of us, you and I have both been in war zones. We both understand what those look like. What is the real issue here? I mean, from a perspective, if you draw back and simply say, well, Russia, you can do whatever you want to up into a certain line, is that what we want? Is there a desire to activate without – where do you see it right now? Because I think the Biden administration, frankly, has been such – is problematic on this. We've had Republicans have been sort of on both sides of it. Where do you see now a year into Ukraine? And I say this in light of what do we do if, say, Iran decides to invade Iraq or Afghanistan or China into Taiwan, North Korea into South Korea? How does that fit from your military background, being in the Army, Air Force side? How do you see the geopolitical landscape right now?
Yeah, and I mean, under that, we've already allocated over $115 billion to the Ukrainians, and then they shoved a bunch more through right in that omnibus before the Republicans took over. Look, Congress needs to have a decision and let the people decide, are we going to be involved in Ukraine or not? Let the Congress be involved in that decision. Right. You have a White House that has zero strategy right now in foreign affairs. Zero strategy. We're going to just keep funneling money? Well, okay, at what point? As both of us, as former military officers, what is our strategy and purpose in our mission? And right now, we don't have that being exercised from this White House and this administration on what exactly is the plan in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe to deal with Russian aggression. What is the plan if China does go into Taiwan? There's all of these things that there's no strategy from this White House. So Congress should come up with what our plan is going to be based on what the American people want us to do.
Exactly. It's been one of the more, and I've talked about this before, the idea that, Congress, and I've heard so many people say, well, we just have to follow in. I've heard Republicans say that. I've heard Democrats say it. Well, we just need to, the Constitution talks about the president's role and, in armed conflicts. It has a limited role. It says that he can, protect our country. He can instigate this. But at the end of the day, and I've heard so many people go back, to the War Powers Act, which I believe is completely unconstitutional in and of itself, But yet Congress forgets if you don't like a action by this administration, okay? Now, granted, we have to get into politics here. Congress has the ability to defund it. I mean, if they wanted out of Iraq in 2008, all they had to do was say, no, we're not spending another dime. Get out. But we tend, it's become politically easy to throw it to the administration instead of taking the hard decision. It's just like, some of the decisions we see in energy, education, other things. Look, the power of the purse sits right there in the United States House.
And that's why it was so offensive that they passed that omnibus in December with a Democratic House in concert with a Democratic Senate, knowing that a Republican legislature was coming into the House that could do that and control those purse strings. Now we're pushed all the way out to October, so it'll be next fiscal year that we'll have the ability to use those purse strings to accomplish those policy objectives. And that's what I've said for a long time now. Look, we can accomplish policy objectives through the appropriations process, and we do it exactly the way you just said. If we don't want money to go to a horrible Department of Environmental Protection, then you defund it. We did it with the IRS agents and the army of IRS agents that they wanted. We just defund it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be important. And I think it then, strikes a balance, realizing the Senate's still under Schumer control. Although, if they keep, sort of sidelining Democrat senators, they're not going to have a working majority to start with over there as it goes. Last question, and I think you sort of opened the door here with this one as well. October, September, middle summer, June, July, we're going into this debt ceiling issue. And, again, this is money we've already spent. This money has already been appropriated. This is not new money. The question is, in the future, how do we maybe rein this in? And I think do you feel like Republicans are doing a good enough job at talking about fact, look, we're not going to default on our debt, but we've got to make sure this doesn't happen in the future. We're not talking about current spending. That's already spent. That debt ceiling is stuff we've already allocated. It's already by a previous Congress, signed by the president. It's already going to be spent. It's going to go over the 31 trillion, whatever it is. But are we doing a good enough job as conservatives explaining to the American people this is not about wanting to default on debt already accrued, but making sure that we don't go further in this in the future?
Yeah, and Speaker McCarthy's done a really good job on this and been very clear that there's not a bill that's going to come out of the House that doesn't deal with deficit spending and curbing in our national debt. And I think that's the only way he's going to get the votes, certainly on the Republican side. I'm not going to vote to increase the debt ceiling without any agreement whatsoever as it relates to spending. So we have to do that. When the Tea Party wave got elected after the 2010 elections, you saw that deficit spending put in place of any increase in the debt ceiling. That's what McCarthy's been very clear, that nothing's coming out of the House unless it has those agreements in it. And so I think that's going to be pretty much the hard line. Now, I could see Democrats in this White House trying to shut down the government over it and blame Republicans. But just in the 4 years that I've been in Congress, when I got elected, we were at $21 trillion deficit. We're at $31 trillion now in just 4 years. We can't sustain this level of spending without curbing the deficit, and I'm glad to see Speaker McCarthy taking a stand on that.
Well, and I think one of the things we've got to also be aware of, Greg, is from our perspective too, is we saw deficits go down, and Obama tried to claim credit for it. The reality was it was because of the deal in which you were cutting, X amount of dollars, 50% out of discretionary, 50% out of and 50% out of social programs discretionary, and then 50% out of the military. We've got to avoid that because, as you well know, especially like in Navy, everything else, we had by 2017 when Donald Trump was elected, 2018, we had half our F-18s couldn't fly. And so we got to be smart. You don't just go in and just take a cleaver. You got to make sure that you're cutting in the proper places. I think that's the best route, but you got to explain that as we go forward. Buddy, it's good to see you up and about. It's good to see you getting ready. Hopefully we're all going to be in prayer this week for your x-rays to come back, get you ready to fly, get you back where you need to be up in Congress. And we're just going to keep in prayer that God uses you in a mighty way through this event. And I think your story is one that needs to be told. It's a reminder to all of us that God is very real. He takes care of us. And in this case, he chose to spare you. In this case, he chose a more life for Greg Stubbe. I can't think of a better way to see how that is going to play out. Buddy, thanks for being with us today, okay?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
This is some exciting news, and you've got some time still left if you want to get in on it early. You got a chance to go to the DougCollinsPodcast.com/DC to get on the spiritual heritage trip with me and Eric Hastings, sponsored by Salem Media and Inspiration Travel.